And we are live. Welcome again, everyone, to the superhero fiction 5 nights of panels. Tonight, we are quite delighted discussion of heroes and what we love about them and what we don't love about them and why we love bad people so much. Joining me tonight is, and we'll do introductions in just a second, is Samantha Bryant, Justin Sloan, Amanda Cherry, Taylor Elwood, Scott A. Story. So, my name is Jeremy Flagg, and I'm tonight. You see, I like to do gestures. But why don't you guys kind of introduce yourselves, what you do, what you hate, and we'll go right across my screen. So, Samantha.
Hi, I'm Samantha Bryant. I write the Menopausal Superhero series, which is pretty much like it sounds like. You've got women of a certain age who are the ones who get the powers this time. And the first book is called Going Through the Change, on 99-cent sale right now if you want to try it. And my newest release was just a couple weeks ago, and it's called The Goodwill Tour. Nice to see you all.
Justin?
Hello, I'm Justin Sloan. So I write on, my microphone went up really weird for a second. I write on superheroes and a bunch of sci-fi, mostly superheroes in space. So it's kind of a space opera hybrid with a bunch of superheroes. But I also write as Jamie Hawk, which is a lot of superheroes with a lot more of the naughty stuff involved. So don't look that up unless you're ready for that.
I did not know that you were Jamie Hawk.
Heyo.
Hi, nice to meet you, Jamie.
Yeah.
Amanda?
Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Cherry. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Rights and Desires, starring a super villain as the main character, which I was the first author in that particular pantheon to tackle a baddie as my protagonist. Yeah, I write mostly superheroes, urban fantasy, and a little bit of space opera just for fun. And I, too, enjoy the naughty bits.
We've heard about this. Taylor?
Hey there, Taylor Elwood here, and I just finished writing my first superhero trilogy, which is the Learning How to Be a Hero trilogy, and I'm actually in the process of starting to write my anti-hero trilogy, which is Learning How to Be a Villain. So I'm really excited about that and having fun exploring the villain's perspective.
Then it's perfect you're here. And last but not least, Scott.
Well, I could be least. Who knows? My name is Scott Story. I come from the indie comics world, where I drew for a zillion publishers before I switched over to prose. And I've got one superhero book out now called Changing of the Guard. And quite a few of the characters in there are villains, which I love to write. They get all the best lines. So that's who I am.
Well, thank you for coming with us tonight. My name is Jeremy Flagg. I write the Children of Notre Dame universe. So far, no big bad takes center stage. I haven't quite gotten there yet, but my heroes are pretty moody and do bad things. So everyone has a favorite anti-hero. And we're going to get into a little bit more in depth about what it means to be an anti-hero and how do you get this classification. But for you, what is the anti-hero that you love and that you can't get enough of, and why? Let's go backwards and start with Scott.
My favorite anti-hero is probably John Constantine. And I love it when he interacts with the DC universe. Honestly, Batman is an anti-hero because he works at cross purposes to everybody else, and he's kind of a fascist. That's one of the things that makes him so interesting. But John Constantine probably takes the cake.
Dude in a trench coat, you kind of just know right away that you're going to be looking at an anti-hero.
Just a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. How about you, Taylor?
For me, I've always found Magneto to be a fascinating anti-hero because, I mean, really, he is an anti-hero. I mean, sometimes he's been portrayed as a villain, but he's really not. He's fighting for a cause, and he's got some valid points to make. But the way he goes about it is not necessarily the right way to go about it, and that's what makes him such an interesting anti-hero because you find yourself feeling for him at times, but other times you shake your head and you're like, "Oh, dude, you're just doing it wrong."
One of my favorite T-shirts is just the helmet, and it just says Magneto was right.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of mine too.
Okay, how about you, Amanda?
For Jewish anti-heroes.
I mean, I have to stand Ruby Killingsworth of my own creation because she's super wicked and so much fun. But as far as pop culture things that, you know, perhaps someone else has read, I do like a dark Batman. I super enjoy when Batman is taken to that darker place and not that like fun 1960s place, no matter how much I enjoy camp. But really, truly in my heart, I have this insane love for MCU Loki. Tom Hiddleston has given me a Loki to love forever.
You and millions of other ladies out there agree. And quite a few men.
I mean, can't help it. Can't stop, won't stop.
Justin, how about you?
I'll go with a mainstream, easy answer of Harley Quinn. I'm a big fan of bacon, cheese, egg breakfast sandwiches, as is she. So we have that in common, and as evidenced in her latest movie. And I just love that about these kind of characters, where the whole idea is that they can, you know, go outside the box and just do whatever the hell they want. And she's definitely one of the characters who can do whatever the hell she wants.
And she gets almost a complete hall pass, no matter how bad she is.
Right.
We want more.
Yeah, and that's what's fun. I mean, there's the good ones like the Punisher, where it's like they're still an anti-hero, but they're not totally insane out there. And then there's the ones like her, right, who are, you're just like, she's evil pretty much, but she's still doing cool stuff for reasons that are kind of cool. So I like it. I wouldn't do it.
But I'm glad someone's doing it so I can experience it.
Yeah, so I can watch it and go, oh my God.
Samantha, how about you?
So I'm going to cheat a little and do two. My first anti-hero to win me over was Red Sonja. When I was a little kid, I got all my comics secondhand at this little bookshop in Bellevue. So I got whatever was the other readers in town had sold to Tom, and then he sold them to me. So I'm reading Red Sonja when I'm like 6. I'm probably not supposed to be reading her because she's like mostly naked and she kills people and is fine with that. And I'm buying into all her just vengeance and probably warping my tiny little brain. So I'd say Red Sonja was definitely my first anti-hero. But the most recent one to really grab me was Jessica Jones. And I'm not as familiar with Jessica Jones from comics. She's not one that anybody in Bellevue was reading, apparently. She didn't end up in the used comics bin. But I have watched the TV show. And I love, she gets one of the things I love most about anti-heroes is the whole reluctant hero thing, where they usually they're people who care so much that they're trying to convince themselves and everyone else that they don't care. And so they kind of have to be pulled into whatever the heroic mission is and buy into it really personally. And Jessica Jones is great for that, where she shut herself off completely from being a hero and then ends up, having to be all heroic again.
And I really liked her because she is so me. Just because I have powers,
yeah, who says I have to use them to save your butt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go outside of the big two, and I'm gonna say Spawn. Tragic backstory. We understand why. A little dance with the devil, but when he destroys everything, I feel justified. Mm-hmm. So thank you. No one said Deadpool. I'm actually a little bit shocked here on that one.
Oh, he's fun, but he's not my favorite.
Yeah, I think he's many people's go-to.
Maybe I'm another girl to not like him because he's popular.
I like him a lot because he's funny, but yeah, he's not my favorite. I mean, he's great for comic relief.
I never enjoyed him in the comic. I loved it's Ryan Reynolds I love, but that personification was always my favorite. We'll bring her right back. So big question is,
there she is.
What is a defining characteristic of an anti-hero? What, not a good guy, not a bad guy, but what are some of the things that really cement this as its own entity, with not a good guy doing some bad things or a bad guy occasionally doing some good things? Is there something that really cements them as their own? Let's do a little hop all over the board and go Justin.
Sure. I was going to say, let's let somebody smarter answer that one first. Because when I come on the panel, I was like, do I write anti-heroes? What are anti-heroes? And then I asked my readers, and they're like, yeah, this character and this character. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. But I guess I would just say the idea of being willing to go above and beyond what is considered the norm in society, right? Like you have the characters who will go for revenge, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. And there's like the Punisher move, the famous one in the TV show where somebody says like, I know nothing, and he says good or whatever and just shoots the guy, versus like a normal hero wouldn't pull that trigger, right? Because you don't kill somebody just because. And so I think it's mostly that for me is when they're, I mean, on the one side, there's like a couple kinds of anti-heroes, I'm sure, but on the one side, and just that ability to just not give a F, and do whatever you want to do for your goal.
Yeah, just forget if it lines to good or bad. Just go with what you want, and if it works, it works.
Right, and that's why Harley Quinn's so fun. Yeah. She's more on the evil side. So I guess there's the other side, right? Which is there's the evil ones too, which they're blatantly evil, and some of the ones we mentioned are more on that line. But they're still heroes that we want to follow. So that's kind of I'm sure we'll get into that next.
Yeah, I think there's some psychology that we need to pick apart here. Scott, how about you?
Well, you've got characters like Dr. Doom, for example, who considers himself the hero. And in fact, whenever he's put to the test, he usually wins because in his mind, he is the hero and he's the one that knows what he needs to do to save the world as he thinks of it. And I think that's what sets him apart. There are bad ones like, your Red Skull type who are just bad dudes and have nothing good in heart. But one like Dr. Doom, who, honestly has the best end. Well, at least I hope you know what I'm saying.
Well, and that's a really good point. Dr. Doom actually believes he's the hero of his own story.
Right.
And from his people's perspective, as a ruler of a kingdom, he is trying to protect them and advance them. So, I mean, he might be my villain, but someone else could say he's the hero.
Right. And he's got sympathetic qualities that actually make you root for him sometimes. And I think that's important for any villain, is to have something for the reader to key in on and actually root for them.
Samantha, how about you?
So a lot of anti-hero characters have a moral ambiguity. They're a lot of times they're not black or white characters, they're gray, which is why I love them, because gray is so much more interesting and comes in so many shades. And I think a defining characteristic for me is that a lot of these characters have their own personal sense of honor or moral code. And so they have lines, and maybe they'll cross them, maybe they won't. Some of those lines are a little blurry, but their lines are not necessarily society's lines. And so, they're like, killing is wrong, except when I do it because I'm killing the right people, or, operating because I'm motivated by personal vengeance is totally fine. Right. So those, it's a really personal moral line. I think, is the thing that makes somebody more of an anti-hero than a straight-up hero.
It is my dad would always say, "Do as I say, not as I do," and I feel that might be the anthem of an anti-hero right there. Amanda, how about you?
For me, mostly, especially when I'm writing a character, it comes down to motivation. Big deeds will fall somewhere on this altruism to hedonism spectrum. And an anti-hero is more likely to be selfishly motivated. If they're doing a good thing, it's probably not for a universally good reason. And if they're doing a bad thing, it may actually be for a more universally good reason. But it's going to benefit them or their worldview or their agenda more than it's necessarily going to benefit everyone else in the story. And if everyone else in the story does benefit from it, well, that was probably an accident.
Just by chance, I gave you this gift.
Oops. Save the world.
Taylor, how about you?
I think with anti-heroes, you know, they're defined by their demons to some degree, but not you know, in a way where you can feel that conflict. Like you look at Magneto as an example, and he's defined by his experiences in World War II, of course, but he's also defined by the experiences that he has later on as he's trying to fight for, you know, his fellow mutants. And he has selfish reasons for doing it, but he does have those altruistic reasons. But nonetheless, there's always that internal conflict going on. And I think what makes a good anti-hero is that the anti-hero isn't necessarily on one side or the other of the spectrum. There's somebody that we can all identify with to some degree. Because we're all human beings, we see ourselves, you know, in our own conflicts within that anti-hero. And so that shapes our appreciation, because we can say, I can relate to that character. Whereas like Dr. Doom is a great example of that too. Sometimes, you know, you have real sympathy for him. He got his face scarred. He's trying to protect his people. It's not like he's purely just an evil bastard. He actually has good reasons to do what he's doing. It's just that those good reasons aren't true to the American way. And so, of course, the Fantastic Four has to come in and stop him before he ruins the world, or whoever it is. And so I think that's kind of what I look at, are the aspects, the internal conflict, and how that shapes the anti-hero.
Okay, so we got some questions coming in, so I'm gonna detour from the script. And Trish actually wants to know why do we love these anti-heroes so much? Like, we are all here on this panel because we love them. So what about them draws us to them? Amanda, how about you?
Again, I think it's what I said earlier about doing things out of hedonism. In real life, we have a really hard time as adult human beings with responsibilities to each other and our world and our kids and our jobs and whatever else, being completely selfish. If we get caught with our hand in the cookie jar, we put the cookie back and say we're sorry. Whereas your stereotypical anti-hero is not going to do that. They're going to get caught with their hand in the cookie jar and go, yeah, it's cookie jar. And I'm gonna eat a cookie now, and I'm not sorry about it. And they're able to further their own agenda, be that a personal agenda for themselves and their surroundings, or for the world at large, in a way that breaks rules unapologetically. And I think there are a lot of us who wish we could do that in real life and just, you know, don't want to go to jail.
That's a really good point. And now I want cookies.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, Justin, hop on in.
Yeah, and what I like about that too is going a step further. Is sometimes, you know, they won't take the cookie, and that's what's cool about like Harley Quinn. You know, she'll look at you and be like, "Oh, you wanted this cookie," and she'll give it to you, and you'll be like, "Oh, what just happened? Why did Harley Quinn just give me that cookie?" And then be all nice about it, walk away, and go blow somebody's head off. It's just like, whoa. And then you watch like the Joker, right? The Todd Phillips Joker. Hopefully, not spoiling it for anybody. But you know, some people find it depressing or sad or whatever. But watching it as a movie of him becoming who he's supposed to be, who we want him to be, if that is him. It's uplifting. It's motivational. It's like you're watching this development of who you know he's supposed to evolve into, and it's great. And there's the moment where he kills one guy, And if he's a true villain, like an evil two-dimensional villain, he'd kill the other guy. You know, the door's locked. You have to feel this moment of like, is he going to kill this other guy? And the other guy can't reach for the door if people haven't seen it. I'm spoiling it like crazy. But the point is, he doesn't take every single action that a villain would. And I think that's great, because these characters, as a writer, you can write them and have them just do whatever you want, because maybe in that moment they want to do this and the character says so. But if it was a true hero, they might kind of have to do this, which sucks as a writer, because then you're forced to go that direction, kind of.
I cannot believe that you just turned the Joker movie poster into a motivational quote in a guidance counselor office.
Yeah, for me, it is.
That is awesome. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I think what Amanda was talking about with the wish fulfillment aspect is a big important part of anti-heroes. I think for a lot of us, that, you know, we would like to make our own moral lines that maybe don't agree with everybody else's. But I think another aspect is the how can I put this? The idea that all of us have darkness and demons and flaws, and myself, I find it easier to sympathize with characters when I get to see theirs. I find it easier to find myself in there, or, you know, maybe they're darker and grittier than me. You know, I'm a middle school Spanish teacher. I don't get to be all that dark, but you know, we all have darker moments and motivations that are not pure and altruistic. And so I find it harder to connect to those true blue kind of characters, especially long-term, like over long arcs. I can connect to one for a story or two, but like Superman's never been that exciting a character to me, because most of the time he's so thinly drawn with just, he does right because he does right. And I find that dull. I find people who have to struggle a little bit to do the right thing, what they've defined as the right thing, a whole lot more interesting.
So I'm gonna follow this question up. So Scott Morgan wants to know, are anti-heroes subconsciously or otherwise looking for redemption? Is that an inherent aspect of anti-hero? Scott, how about you?
You know, I'm going to have to, at least my first impression is no. They know what they want. They're not morally, you know, tied up about it. And unless there's something in their past that they honestly feel that they need redemption for, I don't think that's part of the makeup.
Anyone want to counter that? Or is that?
I think it depends. Like, I can think of examples that do and examples that don't. Like, to me, you know, Black Widow, she talks all the time about the red in her ledger and how she's motivated by trying to undo bad things she's done. So pretty darn clearly, she's worried about balancing the scales. And somebody like Wolverine is obviously tortured by some of the past things he's done, and at some level is trying to make good, like he can, you know, balance it out. But I don't think that's true for every anti-hero at all. I think it might be a subcategory of, you know, within anti-heroes, there are some that are motivated by redemption and some who couldn't care less if they are redeemed in your eyes. Who cares what you think?
Yeah, the characters I write don't feel as though they have anything requiring redemption. They don't think they've done anything wrong or bad, or that penance would be required of them. Like, no, I'm just living my life.
Taylor, Justin?
I like when it's related to them specifically. Like, I guess you could say that the Punisher, the Netflix Punisher, he's looking for redemption in terms of his family. He feels like he let them down. He wasn't there to save them or what have you. So in that sense from them, but maybe not from anybody else. And I imagine a lot of it relates to that other question about like the hero's journey. A lot of these characters that are kind of going through their own little hero's journey probably have that in terms of somebody or themselves or something. But I was looking at noschool.com, no film school, sorry, when I was getting ready for this and just looking over what their thoughts were. And they were talking about the two kinds, which are like the ones who go through the unconventional techniques to do the heroic things versus a villain that we follow as a protagonist. And I definitely feel like that former, the one with the unconventional techniques, more like Punisher, would fall into that category, kind of like what you were saying.
Taylor?
I was going to say that, I mean, echoing what Samantha said, it depends on the anti-hero. You know, some are going to have some type of redemption going on. I mean, Deadpool is a good example of this. You might not think of it, but as you look through his story arc in comic books, there are different times where he's trying to redeem certain things that he's done, and other times where he's just a chaotic element. And I think, you know, you look at any character, there's got to be for an anti-hero, there's got to be something motivating them that still nonetheless is compelling. Sometimes it's going to be redemption. Sometimes it's going to be something else. Dr. Doom doesn't need redemption. He knows what he wants. He's going after it, and he knows that it's right for his people. So, you know, it's just the different characters define, you know, approach the situation based on what's going on within them and what's really driving them.
So we've come up with a couple examples of this, but I kind of want to explore this. I did not kind of anticipate this being a night of superhero psychology. Surprise. Do anti-heroes have to fall into the good guy category, or can they cross over into being irrevocably evil and still be an anti-hero? Anyone want to start off?
I'm kind of writing a story that starts off with characters who are, I'm going to spoil it if anybody guesses what story I'm talking about. So, but anyway, I've written book one. It's out now. And they start off being heroes. Things happen. And my plan is that they're going to be villains in the next book. So in that case, would fall into that second category of anti-hero, where you're still following them as the hero. And I don't know. So I'm going to approach it and see if it works. I don't know if the readers will enjoy it or hate me for it. It's a toughie. But
are you going to toy out the idea of there's still a chance of redemption, or are we just going, you as a villain from here on out?
Really spoiler here. There's two characters. My current idea is that I do one of those paths for each of them. And see what happens. So, and I haven't figured out what book 3 would be yet. Would book 3 be this one or this one? I don't know yet.
Everyone will forget by then.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Well, I had a character. Oh, you go first, Amanda.
That's okay. My Ruby is a villain. She started off as a villain. She spends her whole book as a villain. She spends the entire next book that's currently being drafted as a villain. We very much admit that she is wicked as they come, all the while being the hero of her own story, all the while having her own antagonists who some of the time are also villainous and terrible. We have a deliberate Donald Trump analog in the White House in Cobalt City right now, and Ruby hates his guts and calls him a pusillanimous cretin and a bloviating tick, sometimes to his face. So she is in and of herself a quite wicked being, and she owns it and she lives it proudly. But there are still situations in which she's likable and you're willing to go on this journey with her. So I do think you can have an anti-hero character who is truly in their kernel wicked, but you have to write them in such a way that the audience isn't turned off immediately. You have to make them charming.
Now, at any point in your book, is there a chance that we're going to see her cross over potentially into the good guy role, or is it just good guy by chance?
It's good guy by chance and occasionally good guy by association. She seduces a very famous superhero and spends a little too much time with him, and he is a precious cinnamon roll that only does good for goodness sake. And so every now and then she catches herself being sweet and generous, and she's like, ew, what is that? I need to stop.
Scott, how about you?
You know, I think really the question gets down to true psychopaths and true sociopaths. I don't like to think in terms of good and evil because a lot of times these characters just have sociopathic tendencies. But can they do something that is beneficial or kind? Sure. I think, you know, it's just like Harley Quinn was brought up. You know, clearly a psychopath, clearly somebody who doesn't, you know, make the same connections everybody else does. But can she be nice? Yeah, sure, when the will takes her. or by accident. And that's how I like to frame it, is in terms of mental state.
And it's kind of nice having that psychopathic mentality, because like Justin said earlier, she could do something nice that is completely contradicting your expectation over and over and over again, and it's in character.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for the reader, we touched on it a little bit. What in the superhero world do you feel that the anti-hero is fulfilling? We talked a little bit about the Samantha was mentioning how, we like that moral ambiguity because we get to experience it. But is there any other reason why anti-heroes have climbed to such a status within the superhero universe?
Well, I think when we're looking at ensemble pieces, when you look at like the Justice League or the Avengers, it really helps to have some foils and some contrast. And you can take a true blue like Steve Rogers and put him up against arguably anti-hero like Tony Stark, and then that gives you some really interesting contrast. Or in Justice League Unlimited, because DC's better animated. But in Justice League Unlimited, you've got the Superman-Batman contrast, and they make each other more interesting because of the ways they contrast.
Mm.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Not to take it R-rated, but it can make romantic dynamics a little more interesting also. It can make relational dynamics within teams, across teams, within a property a little more exciting and a little more spicy. If you're not 100% good guy being 100% good 100% of the time.
For sure. And when you're looking for areas of drama, it's fun to be thinking about, if you're building a team, that's some good drama right there. Do we let that person into the team based off of who they are or what they've done? A lot of fun there. I was listening to something else recently.
And how much do we
about...
trust them? And when... No, I know we're lagging. Keep going.
I was talking about Goku and now I'm having a brain freeze thing because of lack of sleep. The other guy in the Goku story, Dragon Ball Z, where they made him because Goku was kind of too goody two-shoe, too one-dimensional, and then their big anti-hero comes up, and kind of what they were talking about was that it plays the role. Every once in a while you get a pop culture thing going where there's too many Supermans, too many good guys, and it's great to just suddenly then pop culture starts bringing in all these anti-heroes because we're starting to feel too, I don't know, too smiley or something.
And sometimes from a storytelling perspective, having a potentially unreliable narrator in the room can really work for us as authors, as far as getting across what information we want to get across, selling a story with a spin the way we want it to, so that when a reveal happens later, that reveal is juicy and meaty and delicious. Whereas if the entire time your point of view character is 100% reliable good guy, he's going to spill the beans right there and you have no way to obfuscate. So from a storytelling perspective, they're also very useful.
Taylor, how about you?
I mean, I think that what I find fascinating, as far as the role of the anti-hero, is that it provides a nice contrast where you're able to compare and contrast the heroes and villains versus that anti-hero, and it adds some more depth to what you're experiencing and reading. I enjoy a good anti-hero story because it's like, all right, this is someone I can relate to, instead of someone like Superman who's all goody two-shoes. It's like, oh, that's great, Superman, and he's an alien on top of that. I just can't relate to an alien that can't, unless you give him some kryptonite, he's got no weaknesses.
So, going to take this out of the realm of superhero because I'm kind of curious. Victoria Lofton asked, is Tyler Durden from Fight Club classified as an anti-hero?
Yeah.
Scott, you want to go with that?
Sure. Yeah, he's definitely the dissenting voice, and he has intentions that are, not healthy. They may be, exploring manliness and masculinity and all of that, but they're not in a healthy way. A fight club is not a comfortable thing, and that's what Tyler Durden represents. He's kind of that rogue voice that's in the back of a lot of masculine heads.
Anybody else?
I have a follow-up kind of question slash thought. Is so can an anti-hero of one story, can an antagonist of a story be an anti-hero at the same time? Like if I'm watching the movie and I'm thinking of that guy as the hero, even though he's the antagonist, is that an anti-hero? Or I don't know the answer to that. I guess it kind of is, like we were talking about Magneto because we know him from other stories, but if we're still watching him in a story where he is the antagonist, he's still kind of an anti-hero because we know who he is.
Well, that I found in the second season of Daredevil, when they introduced the Punisher, I found it extremely interesting because Daredevil is kind of a might makes right, good reasons, and I'm trying to be a good guy, but I got some questionable methods. And here comes the Punisher, who dials up questionable methods.
Mm-hmm.
So
good example, yeah.
Quite possibly, yeah.
But Tyler Durden, he's kind of just a chaos element in one way of thinking. But then I like what Justin was saying, that it's all about where you're standing when you look at the story. Whose perspective are you looking at it from? And Fight Club was brilliantly written in that way, where your footing is always shifting, and as you're reading it, I've only watched it once when it was new, so I don't remember the movie as well, but I read the book kind of recently, and that was one of the really interesting things in it, is how as you're reading it, you keep shifting where you think you are, because he's such a charismatic character as well, and charisma is, we didn't talk about that as a characteristic of an anti-hero, but it is for a lot of them, that they're, in spite of being surly or rude or obnoxious, they're still also really charismatic.
So this brings up a really good question. I'm going to segue with this. Miranda was asking, is an element of an anti-hero the appeal of the bad boy or the bad girl, and their ability to flirt with danger? Is there something that goes beyond that psychological and kind of jumps into the world of I'm gonna
yes.
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 Well, and I think anti-heroes are often also tricksters. And this goes back to Loki or John Constantine. And they're always getting one over on other people. And I think that's another one of the draws that goes into the charisma.
Yeah, I do think charisma as dump stat has a role to play when you're talking about particularly an appealing bad boy, an appealing bad girl. As I said earlier, you got to make them charming, make them sexy. So yeah, I think that's definitely a piece of the build a good anti-hero mad science kit.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your definition of bad boy and bad girl, right? Like when I first read that, I was like, because I was thinking like the cool kid in the leather jacket, you know. But obviously Joker in Todd Phillips Joker is not that. He's very much nerd mama's boy, skinny weirdo. But it still has that bad boy in the sense of bad. And is that
we talked about Harley
bad boy or bad girl as like rule breakers, people who are willing to buck the line, whatever the line is. So you got that in a lot of anti-heroes.
I think too, like that sometimes that's definitely a formula for an anti-hero, but you can have other formulas. Like for me, the anti-hero I have in my Learning How to Be a Hero series is the best friend of the hero. And he's not necessarily a bad boy per se, but he's somebody who goes through some fundamental changes as a result of his powers. And it forces him to become more of an anti-hero, and he's trying to do stuff that he thinks is right, but in the end that ends up being his downfall. So I think sometimes an anti-hero can be something that isn't necessarily a bad boy per se, but somebody who's just doing something for the wrong reasons, even if he or she thinks that they're perfectly justified.
So I'm gonna open this one up to everyone. What's the worst thing your anti-hero has done in the book? Samantha, how about you?
So my anti-hero is Patricia O'Neill, also known as the Lizard Woman of Springfield. And, well, it kind of depends on who you ask. She threw an old lady into a wall. She led her team into something that ended up being a trap out of her own arrogance and got somebody really badly hurt. She lied in ways that caused a lot of damage, and she hid information because she had personal motivations that were in the way of the mission. So yeah, she's all kinds of trouble. I guess it depends on which of the other heroes you ask what the worst thing is that she did.
Scott, how about you?
Dr. Sen is a multinational terrorist out of Brazil. And he has actually blown things and people up, believing that he was doing scientific research. That would be a good example. However, in the end, the way he meets his doom is saving someone's life. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Justin, how about you?
Yeah, so I don't know if they're that bad. I have one character in one of my stories. My first book I ever wrote, it's a dual protagonist thing, and one of them is basically the bad guy you think, but then he has some redeeming moments, and then similar situation is coming along where he sacrifices himself, and along the way you start to realize that he probably was kind of a good guy in spite of all that horrible stuff all the way a lot. So I guess it's kind of one of these characters. And yeah, he slaughters a whole village and kills like the mayor of it after promising him things and stuff. But going to my alter ego, I have a character who's like one of these hell-bent on revenge type characters, kind of like the Punisher, except for she flies around in space and destroys spaceships and stuff. And so she's probably my better example of like going to kind of evil levels. She believes it's a spaceship full of kind of villains, so she has no problem just destroying as many as she can and whatever. But yeah, I can't think of like one thing though. It's just mass destruction and death.
I love how you said it wasn't all that bad, and then you talked about how they slaughtered an entire village.
Yeah, I mean, but there's no like entrails and weird,
It could be so much worse.
It was such a nice slaughtering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Taylor, how about you?
Well, in my case, the character of Simon that I was talking about earlier, he basically is motivated to try and get the powers back for the superhumans because they got taken away, and then afterwards to secure a place for those superhumans to live in peace separately from the humans, because after having a year of not having powers, they've seen what the humans have done. The humans were like, oh, okay, they don't have powers anymore, we're going to start using them as slave labor and kick them around and everything. And so, he's really motivated from a place of trying to get things back, but he's also got that selfish angle of he wants the power for himself. And at the end, when he's in this situation where he's working alongside this entity that's helping him get these powers back, and the entity decides it's had enough, and he goes back on his agreement to let it go, and that's what causes his downfall at the end, because he does it for selfish reasons, because he doesn't want to lose his powers again.
Amanda?
I mean, Ruby is across the board pretty terrible. She's a billionaire CEO, so there's the lying, cheating, stealing, all the evils of capitalism right there in one redheaded package. But I think the single worst thing, I mean, maybe the breaking into the police station and demolishing the vault and setting the building on fire was kind of bad, but Cobalt City is a multi-author universe, and I used her to, at the very beginning of the book, break up the 15-year marriage, no, longer than that, the 20-year marriage of the city's preeminent superhero. So I was ready for that to come back from the editor with a big no written on it, and instead, thankfully, they were all like, "Oh, somebody had to do it. It was getting so boring." But I think probably the interpersonal wickedness is her big signature badness.
You just
So not only does she destroy the police station, she's a home wrecker.
She's a home wrecker.
From page
and
one.
she's super unapologetic.
I love her already.
My hero, you don't find out until the end of the book, kind of manipulated the whole thing, and within the first chapter, 17.2 million people get nuked. But the problem was she did that, so now how do we up the stakes? So, oops.
Wait.
So, nope, go for it.
I just wanted to throw out there. One of my readers reminded me just now, because I guess they're watching. Hey, have you guys seen The Boys? Is that what it's called? The Boys on Amazon or something?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's that scene with the head and the grinding, and it's bad. It's disgusting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I had actually done something like that in one of my books, but it came out like a year before The Boys, so I was kind of saw that, and somebody was like, one of my co-writers was like, "Dude, you are disturbed," and then the show came out, and it was Vindication. I don't want to go into too much details.
Yeah, I think
that was.
that show is disturbed as well, though.
Damn it! I can't win.
And the comic books it was based off of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that in the comic? I wonder if it was in the comic books.
I remember the comic being pretty graphic.
Yeah. A lot of comics are. I was raised on Tank Girl. That was like my upbringing. So I mean, remember good stuff in there. Anyway.
Yeah, I had Tank Girl taken away at an early age.
My parents didn't watch what I was reading nearly enough.
No, not even a bit. So when does an anti-hero become irredeemable? Or they cross over into pure villain or even pure good guy, or they stop walking that line? Is there a spot where something can happen that doesn't let them ride that moral line? I'm going to open this one up to anyone, because
I think that's up to the audience. I think it's different for every single reader. I think as an author, you sort of try to keep within your own bounds of where you want that character to be, but there may be something they do that is that one reader's squick point, and from then on that character is irredeemable. And the same thing, there may be one thing that they do that is that reader's I stan point, and you can never get that reader to not love that character and see them as inherently good. We do our best as authors to put a character in, whatever box we think they fit in, and write them within our understanding of that box. But really, if they cross a line, that's the reader's line, and the reader gets to determine how they place that character in the pantheon of good, bad, and otherwise in their own world.
Scott?
There was a period where Mark Waid wrote the Fantastic Four, and he had Dr. Doom put aside science and turn his first love, Valeria, into a skin suit. That really pissed me off. But I was actually mad at Mark Waid, and I told him that later. But I think no matter how bad a character is, if at the last minute they do the right thing, there is no point of irredeemable, there may be a point where you've pissed off a reader, but there's no point where the character can't do an about face.
Yeah, irredeemable sounds awfully permanent, and also like a failure of imagination on the part of the author, that you may write yourself into a big hole, but maybe you can write yourself back out of that too. So yeah, I'm not willing to call anybody permanently irredeemable.
I always think back to Magneto, because of course, and he basically creates Genosha, winds up getting all of them killed, and turns super evil and goes crazy and tries to destroy the planet again. And then he joins the X-Men shortly thereafter, and he spends almost the next 2 years in the comic being like their lapdog and begging for forgiveness. And I loved how long they dragged out the forgiving for the crime committed. I would have let it off the hook right away, but I have a short memory.
Like Khaleesi, right, in Game of Thrones. I think a lot of fans would have had a hard time ever finding ways to redeem her, no matter how many seasons that went on after the way they did that. But like you said, we often end up blaming the creators instead of the characters. So.
and I actually, people in Game of Thrones are going to throw a fit when I say this. The ending that I got out of Game of Thrones was the ending I thought should have always happened, because in the very first couple episodes, or in the very first season, Khaleesi was always this villain, and then she redeems and then little slip up, redeem, little slip up, and it kind of stayed an undercurrent. So when she went batshit crazy, I was like, I feel you.
Yeah.
Bring it on.
The digression that could last hours, right? This discussion.
Yeah.
To answer your question, I have a thing. I was asking some of my readers, is this character an anti-hero? Because she did some horrible stuff. But then I remembered that there's kind of like this. I guess this is the easy out, is that you find out at some point she was under this kind of curse thing that they break her from. So, then I guess you can't really blame her for it anymore, right? That's a tough thing.
And I think, we could always say like, oh, I was doing bad things because, and now with some justification, now you don't seem so horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's just the thing. There's always a reason for why they're doing what they're doing, and if nothing else, they can justify it to themselves. And if they can sell that justification to other people, then are they really irredeemable? And I also agree with Samantha that you can't, like, if you make it irredeemable, that's such a permanent thing. At that point, you've basically written them off, and unless they've done something truly, truly heinous, I just don't see that happening.
As an anti-hero,
Kylo
right?
Ren committed a lot of genocide. And yeah.
Good to know that they'll come back after a genocide. So with anti-heroes becoming more prevalent with things like Constantine the Show or Punisher or even Jessica Jones, I guess pretty much the Defenders in general, what's an anti-hero property that you would like to see get brought up off the page and into the silver screen? I mean, outside your own books, of course. Taylor.
Well, I mean, I probably would say a Magneto story. I mean, I know they've had him in the X-Men movies, but I think it would be interesting if they did a solo story with him, actually. That would be, outside of the X-Men thing in and of itself. That would be pretty neat.
I was so mad when they scrapped his origin story movie. Anybody else?
I don't remember if there's anti-heroes specifically in this story or not, but the Steelheart series with Brandon Sanderson, I would love to see that come to life. And I remember there was a character that definitely went bad at one point, and so that might be considered an anti-hero. I forget his exact story because it's been a while. But anyway, great series that I'd love to see come off the page.
His mentor is fighting to not become an anti-hero, kinda, sorta.
Right, like they get corrupted if they use too much power or something, and so there's always this balance for everybody. And so I imagine there were some good anti-hero stories in there. It's been a while.
Brandon Sanderson would agree with you. Amanda, how about you?
October Day.
Oh, any particular reason?
I love the stories. I love the world building. I love the character. I ship Just an Impossible Pair in that series. And also, full disclosure, Shauna McGuire is one of my best friends. So I wouldn't mind a payday for someone I love. But no, I really want to see Toby brought to life, and that iteration of San Francisco, and how those characters interact with the fairy world and the real world, and where the moral ambiguity comes into play, because you're never sure who is a good guy and who is a bad guy. And just when you think you know, plot twist. I just think it's magnificently written, and I would really love to see a film series.
Samantha, how about you?
I don't know. I always am so nervous when something I love is being made into a movie. You know, are they going to get it right? Are they going to kill it? I don't know. And so I'd go back to Red Sonja maybe, because, you know, where I'm denying that there have ever been any movies made about her. Because that does not count.
Poor Brigitte.
Or if I want to go with something that I've loved more recently, a writer friend of mine, John Hartness, writes the Quincy Harker series. And Quincy could be really good as a television series. I think maybe I'd like him better as a Netflix series than as a movie, but I don't know. But again, you know, anytime they're looking to adapt something I already love, I come at it like this, like, I don't know if I can look.
Scott, how about you?
Well, they've already done Constantine. They've done The Boys. But I'm really looking forward to Loki when that comes out, the TV show.
I think he is going to be wonderful in a longer solo him.
He was the best part of those movies.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely agree. Okay, so we are starting to get a little bit close to the hour. So for people who are watching this and are interested in getting into writing superheroes, let's turn this question right on to antiheroes. What is a piece of advice you would give a writer who is interested in writing an antihero? What would be the one big piece of advice that you would want to throw their way? Let's go with Amanda.
I would say the major thing starting off writing, and this really works for a hero and anti-hero, especially anyone with big superpowers, figure out what they want and how badly and what their limits are to get it. And then go to bat with what they're able to do within those limits to make it happen. But really, as long as you know what that character wants and how badly they want it, and you are willing to write an uncensored draft of them just doing whatever it takes to get there, that's going to be a really good first building block of a super villain, superhero, anti-hero kind of a story.
Nicely put. Taylor?
Well, I'm actually creating my next hero series, and so I am writing from an anti-hero's perspective, and I think that the key for me is making that character sympathetic to a certain degree. You know, I want the character to be somebody that the people can relate to and that they're going to want to keep reading about. At the same time, I don't want to make the character a hero in such a way that it's like, oh, it's not interesting. I want it to be something where they're drawn in by the internal conflict that the character feels and by how that character sometimes resolves the situation certain ways. By the way, Amanda, I ended up just picking up your book on Kindle because it looks really fascinating.
Thank you. Yay.
Yeah. And
Thank
sale. You. Scott, how about you?
I think the most important thing to me is villains and anti-heroes always have the best lines. They get to say what they think. They're not concerned with the outcomes of that. And everything else everyone else has said, that's all true too, but I like to give them the best lines.
Justin?
In grad school, I had a professor who made me do this whole Excel sheet where I went through a character's life with all these things that happened to them in this timeline and looking at where all that tied into the current story. And you don't have to do all that, but I liked it because it really helped me flesh out who the character is and why they are the way they are. And, you know, if they're sociopaths or whatever, then maybe that won't be as necessary because they're just crazy or whatever, whatever the spectrum is there. But But I think for these kind of characters, it's especially interesting to have something like that in mind and then bring it out in key moments. You know, like when you're watching these stories like Joker or something, and you learn something very key about him, like you learn about the situation with his mom and what happened with him when he was a kid and stuff, and you're like, whoa, mind blown. And if you can get those out in little moments, I also wrote at Telltale Games. I forgot to mention that earlier, and that was a video game company, and we had a thing called campfire moments, where it's when you know, not always at a campfire, but the idea of when you sit down at a campfire and characters finally start revealing things, you know, if throughout the story you can reveal these little bits that you set up to kind of help us figure out why they are this anti-hero and why we really care to watch them or maybe sympathize with them. I think that's a great exercise.
Samantha?
I'd say it's true for any character, but maybe especially for anti-heroes. Everything's so much about personal motivation that you're going to have to be prepared to dive really deep, to dig into why they are doing what they're doing. And there's also a pacing element to consider about when you reveal to your audience the more hidden reasons, you know, when you actually give that backstory moment that helps us all sympathize. It has to come early enough that we haven't just become angry at your character and stopped caring. But if it comes too early, then there's no mystery and you don't get the bad boy, bad girl element. So yeah, I think dive deep, really be prepared to get into their heart and their brain and find out what makes them tick.
Okay, so anyone have, before we do a quick wrap up and let people know where to find you, do you have any last thoughts about anti-heroes in general? No.
I'll just say,
no, go for it.
I'll just say that on Game of Thrones, since we already brought that up, the Hound is the perfect anti-hero. And when we finally find out why his face is burned, he becomes sympathetic and we start to see why he does what he does. That's my last point.
I so loved him. Okay, so how about you guys tell us where we can find you online, your books, all that great information. Samantha?
So hi again, I'm Samantha Bryant and I write the Menopausal Superhero series. So far as I know, it's the only menopausal superhero series. So those two words will probably find me if you Google me. On social media and such, I try to use mostly some version of my name. There's two famous Samantha Bryants. The other one's a lot more famous than me. She's an actress. But if you put in Samantha Bryant author, you will generally find me. And I like to play around on a lot of social media, so you can find me that way. And my website is my name, SamanthaBryant.com.
Justin?
Hello. Yes. So I'm on Amazon, of course. Just Justin Sloan. I just released a book called Prime Evil. That's kind of fits for this maybe. And I have a website, JustinSloanAuthor.com. And I'm on Twitter at Justin M. Sloan.
Amanda?
I am available on Amazon and IndieBound and Barnes & Noble and all of the usual suspects, including your local library. Again, Rights and Desires is available on Kindle, as my charming co-panelist Taylor has just made clear to the group. You can find me online at thegingervillain.com. That is when I remember to update that website. And I am on Twitter pretty much all the time at Manda the Ginger.
Taylor?
Yes, you can find some of my books on the superhero books on Amazon. The Zombie Apocalypse Call Center, which is an entirely different thing, you can find all over the place. Just trying a couple of things there. And you can find my website at imagineyourreality.com.
And Scott?
You can find out more about me at scottastory.com. I'm on Facebook all the time. You can find me as Scott A Story or Johnny Saturn 11. And of course, I'm on Amazon.
And my name is Jeremy Flagg, and you can find me on thechildrenofnostradamus.com, where all my superhero stuff just keeps piling up. So on behalf of superherofiction.com, I want to say thank you very much for coming out with us tonight, both the people who are racking up the comments and for our lovely panel of guests here. If you are interested, we've had Monday and Tuesday have been recorded. They're live on YouTube, and come back again tomorrow and Friday at 6 p.m. for a couple more conversations and panels. So thank you very much, and have a great night, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.